All right. Welcome to episode 88 of Trek Live. How you doing this morning, Bill?
Doing good. Feeling good. Ready to talk some Star Trek non-Discovery. This is our first episode since really the new year.
Yeah, it's been a
Going
while.
back into 2018 that we
Yep.
have had like a loosey-goosey topic that can cover anything
Mm-hmm.
and not like super structured in the Discovery timeline um, of things. So, yeah, really excited to talk about something really broad in general that could cover anything, including Discovery if we wanted to.
Right.
We're going to be talking about our if you're deserted on an island and you can take 5 episodes or movies of Star Trek with you for the rest of your life, what would they be? That's kind of the premise of today's episode. Um, no real rules. We got a lot of really cool feedback from Twitter, people sending their lists and finding their workarounds to get as many hours in there as possible. People counting 2-parters as one and 3-parters as one, which is really cool.
Yep.
There was a lot of really cool responses. So we're looking forward to sharing ours. And like I said, getting into some like more general Star Trek talk for first time in a while. But before we do that, what about your rewatch? The rewatch recap. I don't think we did that last week.
Yeah. I haven't watched any episodes. I plan to this week to get back on the bandwagon. I'm wrapping up TNG. I will admit that I am kind of dragging my feet a little bit because I don't want it to end. I've really enjoyed this going through TNG, and I'm excited to kind of keep going on the rewatch. How's your rewatch going?
It's back on track. I
Nice.
haven't watched non-Discovery Star Trek in like a month. I got to a point where I finished up TOS and I figured I'd pump the brakes and wait for Discovery season 2 to end and just kind of like, soak in Discovery for the back half of that season. So I watched the motion picture on Friday and the Wrath of Khan yesterday, which has been good. I'm planning to watch hopefully the Search for Spock today, and I think the plan's going to be 4, 5, and 6 next weekend, and then on to TNG. But the motion picture is such a strange movie. Like it's I love so much about it, and I have a lot of nostalgia for it. I loved it as a kid. I've always really liked it. But you can't deny that it has issues with its pacing, and it falls into these traps of like extended, like obsessive visual effects. The crew staring at a view screen passages. It can fall into some repetitive territory. But it has a real charm to it. I love the score. I love the production design. The visual effects, a lot of them really do hold up very well for a movie that's now 40 years old. Yeah, and so I do enjoy it. It's one of those. It's one of the movies, one of the episodes / movies that I like tweeting about because the range of responses is always really interesting. There are people who really find it to be like the best movie of the Star Trek franchise. Like there are people who that's their movie,
Right.
and then some people just can't stand it. So it's one that you get like a really polarized response for, and
That always makes for a fun conversation.
yeah, it's not the same, oh, that's awesome kind of comments, over and over again. Like some of them kind of engender. This one, you can never quite know what people are going to say. I really enjoy that aspect of it. And the Wrath of Khan, I said it on Twitter yesterday. I'm pretty comfortable, I think, at this point saying it's the best piece of Star Trek ever. Like, I think it's peak Star Trek. I think it does everything Star Trek can do in one little package. It's got the character stuff. It's got an action adventure element. All of the action lands. Like every piece of action. Like we talk about this a lot in Discovery and in when we talk about the Kelvin timeline movies. That sometimes the action sequences can kind of feel a little bit like we're at like 20 minutes here. We need an action sequence.
Yeah.
Insert action.
Yeah.
Yep. We sometimes it can feel that way. Not just in Star Trek, just in movies in general, I think, and in television. But in Star Trek 2, I think every time there is an element of action, it's meaningful to the story, and it hurts. Like when the Enterprise gets hit by phasers, it feels like it hurts, and it feels like it does real damage,
Yep.
and people die, and it's it's impactful. So I just feel like it's so economical. Like every ounce of that movie is needed and moves the story forward. There's no fat on it at all. Uh, especially for TOS, where it's kind of notoriously non-serialized and it doesn't move the characters forward very much. Star Trek 2 really does. You know, you find out Kirk had this whole other life like that you don't know about. They were where he, you know, had a long relationship with a woman and had a kid and left kid behind, and that there's this whole other chapter of his life that you never knew about.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Spock's moving forward and you know, coming to terms with, you know, where he is as a Vulcan at this time, and in his career with Starfleet. Kirk's at a crossroads with his career. It really does cool things with the characters and moves them forward in actually meaningful ways that make an impact moving forward. So I really do think, I've always kind of said that, like, best piece of Star Trek, if you're going to whittle it down to one thing, I'd usually say it's either City on the Edge of Forever or the Wrath of Khan.
Yes.
But right now, maybe it's just because I just watched the Wrath of Khan, and it came at a time where I had a month where I wasn't watching Star Trek, and it was like, you know, quenching a really dry throat. But I right now, I would say the Wrath of Khan's, I think, the best thing Star Trek has ever produced.
Now the question is, are you taking that on your desert? Was one of your desert islands?
That's something I've been trying to figure out since last night when I watched it yesterday in the afternoon. I haven't totally made up my mind yet. I have a structure that I have in mind for this concept that we'll talk about in a second, and I'll explain why I'm not. I'll make that clear soon.
Okay.
But it's possibly. I'm kind of being fluid right now because this is it's one of those topics that it's like the classic topic of ask me today and I'll give you 5 answers, and ask me tomorrow, I'll give you 5 completely different answers. So I'm trying to be as current with my responses as possible. Like right now, as I'm sitting here, what would I take if I had to pick on the fly in this like second on this day? So we'll see. But real quick, what would you say to the? I know this is definitely putting you on the spot, and I tried to ask Jim Morehouse from Trek Ranks, and he was resistant to give an answer. But what is the best piece of Star Trek ever produced? Is it the Wrath of Khan in your mind, or is there something else that you would say like what's the pinnacle of like this is in one little package? This is what Star Trek does best. Like what's the best thing they've ever done?
I would agree with that. I would say that the Wrath of Khan is I'm comfortable saying that's the best piece of Star Trek that's ever been produced. Now, it can be. I'm not saying this is the end all be all. Obviously, you said that before, like it could change tomorrow, but it's definitely
change the next time I watch City.
Yeah, it's definitely in that conversation as the top 2 or 3 things that are of all of Star Trek that's ever been produced. So
yeah. Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more with that. I think it's definitely in the conversation at the very least. I think.
Yeah.
But it's your mileage may vary. It's one of those things. It's a very personal choice, and for me, I think it's the Wrath of Khan. But yeah. So do we want to jump right in and?
Yeah, you said you had a strategy to kind of picking these episodes. What was that?
Yeah, I guess maybe I've done a few episodes of Trek Ranks with Jim, where it's kind of this top, pick 5 things kind of situation, and from doing that a few times, and even doing that on our show here and there, that prime directive question he always asks, like, what kind of mindset were you in when you were trying to come up with the 5? Like, did you have a system? So I kind of always try to have that mindset, and for me. I did this before with my first appearance on Trek Ranks was the 5. If you were going to introduce somebody to Star Trek, what would be the 5 episodes you would try to use? And I took the attitude of like I want to sample as many shows as possible. And at the time there was no Discovery, and there were 5 Star Trek shows, so I picked 1 episode per show. And that's kind of what I'm doing here too. I'm trying to do. There's 6 shows now, but I'm going to try to pick one episode from the 5 non-Discovery shows to give myself, if I'm going away for the next however many years, I want to have a little taste of each of the shows that I love so much, and hopefully have an episode that kind of embodies what I love about each of those series, I guess. Like I want it to represent, not just be like an anomaly, something that's kind of like an offshoot, kind of a weird episode that's really good maybe, but something that would remind me why I love that particular series as much as I do. So in my list, you're going to find one TOS, TNG, DS9, Voyager, and Enterprise. And unfortunately, because we're doing 5, Discovery is going to be off the list. But I'm sure Discovery will make an appearance in the honorable mentions.
Yeah.
At least. But what about you? Did you have, like, how would you approach this?
I had a similar strategy. I picked one episode or episodes from each show. Because I wanted to be able to represent everything. I went a little bit different direction in that these episodes aren't your normal like on the ship, everyday thing. It's either they're going back in time or something kind of big happens. I have a few episodes that are kind of like on the ship, the normal Star Trek, but there's definitely like a theme here going. I wanted episodes that also had really good rewatchability because, let's face it, if you're gonna be on the island for the rest of your life, these better be you're gonna watch them, forever. So that's what went into my list. So
rewatchability definitely came into mind too. Part of my whittling down of these episodes was like, which ones do I find myself having the easiest time just kind of popping in? And I don't, like I've said many times on the show, I don't do that very often. I'm not one to just kind of pop in a random episode. I tend to watch in whole. But there are episodes that over the years, especially with these older shows, that I know I had an easier time going back to and watching as a one-off. So a lot of these episodes are of that ilk, I guess.
Yeah. Yep. With that being said, what's your first episode?
I'm going to go in reverse order chronologically as far as when the show's aired. So I'm going to start with Enterprise and go that way. But my Enterprise episode is going to be Twilight. It's kind of the moment where I think fell in love wholeheartedly with the show and the cast. It's one of those episodes where I think the jeopardy that the crew is facing I think really kind of raises the emotional stakes. It's early in season 3. It's kind of the what if episode. It's the episode that lays down the marker for what happens if Archer and company fail in their mission with the Xindi. What's the worst case scenario here? And it's not good. Earth gets destroyed, and the Xindi go on this hunt for every last human being that's like scattered throughout the galaxy, trying to run and survive. It's very Battlestar Galactica, I guess. But it has some really cool character stuff in it too. It's got that big picture, like action adventure element for sure. There's a lot of big action in it, but there's really good stuff between Archer and T'Pol. I think it really represents that arc well. It shows how far those characters have come in building a mutual respect. And I've always said that Enterprise to me is the bridge between humanity and the Vulcans in the form of Archer and T'Pol. Like they're building respect for each other represents the humans and the Vulcans being able to work together to build the future that needs to happen. And then Twilight's kind of the peak of that arc to me. So that's sort of the heart of the show. My favorite character in the show might be Trip, and Trip is somewhat sort of sidelined in this episode a little bit. I guess he's the captain of the Enterprise actually in the back half of it. So he does have some cool things to do. He's like this rugged, tired, exhausted, emotionally spent captain who has no time for anything. So he has some definitely cool moments in it, but it's not the character, doesn't represent the character arc that I think everybody thinks of with Trip. It doesn't have the DePaul stuff. It doesn't have the charming, all shucks stuff that I think people like from Trip as much as they do. But it does give most of the cast interesting things to do. Phlox is very involved in trying to figure out the Archer memory issue. He can't remember anything beyond like a few minutes. It's kind of I don't know if you've ever seen Memento, the Christopher Nolan movie, but it's very much like reminiscent of that, where you can't form short-term memories. He remembers long-term things, but he basically has to be retrained every day as to the current circumstances of the ship and everything. He doesn't know what's really happening. And T'Pol is kind of his nurse. And Yeah, that's one that I have an easy time going back to. I think it has everything that Enterprise represents with the character stuff, the human Vulcan element, and Enterprise, like Voyager, I think at its core is kind of an action adventure show at its core, and it's got a lot of that too. So I think it represents Enterprise in a way that I could live with watching for a long time, and I think it would remind me why I love Enterprise as much as I do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's definitely. I mean, I don't know what else to say. Definitely a great pick, and yeah, if I hope that our desert islands are kind of close, so I can come over and watch an episode or two to be able
That'd be
to
convenient. Yeah.
double my list. So, I'll go with my Enterprise pick. I went with Carbon Creek.
Okay.
It's one of my guilty pleasures. Again, it's falling in that in my strategy of this isn't like a normal, like you're on the bridge.
Yeah.
And why it's on my list, I feel like it was like you're around a campfire on that desert island and you're telling a story. So that's why I kind of put it on there. Again, it's one of my guilty pleasure episodes, and I love it, and I couldn't have it. I had to have it. So
yeah, Carbon Creek's awesome. First of all, there's nothing guilty about it. It's a classic.
Yep.
Great episode. And even though it's like not on the ship for most of it, and for a lot of the time, you're not even really with like the characters that we know.
Yeah.
The sort of the bracketing framing device of the three of them sitting in the dining room, the Archer's private dining hall, I guess, with T'Pol telling the story. Like you get just enough of it, and it's just enough of like the trio of that show kind of casually having a good time and
exactly,
like relaxing together, where you get a little taste of it. And I think there's some cool little moments between the three of them in those little scenes that kind of bracket the episode.
Yep.
And Carbon Creek's awesome. It's definitely always a pleasure. I love it more every time I watch it. I feel like I fall for it a little more. It's definitely got a charm to it, and yeah, it's a really, really good pick.
Yep. Yeah, it also has elements of like everyday life, and I feel like on the desert island, I might miss those elements of everyday life.
Sure,
so I think it just it works for me for sure.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's good. Definitely good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah, I guess moving right along. What's your next pick?
For Voyager, it's kind of a similar episode to Twilight. These are two dark ones in a row, I guess. My Voyager pick is Deadlock. You know my love of that episode. It's definitely one of my favorite Voyager episodes. Season 2, so it's pre 7 of 9. But similarly to Twilight, it's the episode where I think, as a little kid watching it in real time, I feel like that's when I kind of consciously remember realizing that I love these characters as much as I ultimately ended up coming down on them. I feel like watching them get mowed down by the Vidians and watching bad things happen to them, just like in Enterprise with the Xindi and Twilight, it makes you realize how much the characters mean to you. And really, really cool Janeway stuff in it with really cool twists. And I think, like I was saying with Twilight, and like I said at the outset with trying to pick these episodes, I think it represents what Voyager does best. It's a weird temporal spatial anomaly, off the wall, like big science fiction concept. We got 2 Voyagers, 2 crews. It's twisty turny. It's not what you expect from a plot standpoint.
Yeah.
I think it makes a good use of the cast. I feel like the cast gets a lot of fun stuff to do. They're all kind of involved, active in it. It's got some emotional punch to it with Naomi Wildman being born and dying. Like they do some really gutsy stuff in the episode. It's really dark, but it's optimistic in the end. It's got a cool ending, and I love the twist. I love how it lulls you into kind of thinking that the crew. There's one crew that's just getting the crap beat out of it by this anomaly. Like the ship is just pounded to smithereens.
Yeah.
And there's one ship that's like completely pristine, not being affected in the same way at all, and it lulls you into thinking that the ship that's like completely pounded into smithereens is going to be the one that sacrifices itself to let the crew that's unaffected survive. And they of course twist that, and it's the other way around. Which I always kind of surprises me if I wait long enough to watch it. So yeah, Deadlock to me is a classic, and it's representative of all the things that I love about Voyager. So, what do you think?
Yeah, I love that episode. I think the rewatchability level on that episode is really high, and I think that's going to be key in something like this. But yeah, it's just a great all-around episode. Not much more I can say about it.
Yeah.
Yep.
Good. Yeah. What about you?
I'll do my Voyager pick. This was really tough for me because I wanted to do another episode, but I just couldn't stay away from the episode I really picked because you mentioned before like the best Star Trek that they've ever produced. This is definitely also in the conversation. It's timeless.
Okay.
I think it just again if I'm bringing an episode, it's got to have everything. This is an action adventure. It has some great dramatic elements. A more technical side, it's great edited. It's really well edited. The pacing's really well on this episode, and rewatchability scale for me is really high on this episode. So that's why it's on my list.
Nice. Yeah, I love that episode. That's definitely way up there on my Voyager rankings. I think I usually go back and forth between that and Blink of an Eye for my favorite like one-off episode, if we're not counting Scorpion and Year of Hell, episodes like that. Two-parters. Yeah. If I'm picking 1 hour of Voyager, it's usually either Timeless or Blink of an Eye or Deadlock. Like they're usually like the three that are kind of hovering in that territory for me.
Right.
And Timeless is for sure like it's certainly I think like their best technical achievement. It's gorgeous. I think that crash sequence is as good as anything Star Trek even today has produced.
Yes.
For like that kind of action event, like that kind of action scene, those kinds of visual effects.
Yeah.
I think that holds up just unbelievably well. It was jaw-droppingly amazing back then, and it still kind of is.
Yes.
And it has a real impact to it. Like I'll never forget seeing the ship just like bounce off the ice.
Yeah.
And you just know like they're all dead. The minute that happens, like, they're all done.
Gone. Yep.
Yeah. They're all dead, just like that. And it's scary. It's like it really has an impact. The hope, like all the optimism in the first chunk of that episode, thinking they're going to get home. Like this is going to work, even though you know it's not going to.
Yeah.
It's gone.
It's gone.
They think they're getting home, and then no, they're all dead. It's a great episode. That again, I think is another pick that would kind of embody like what makes Voyager as good as it is. It does all the things that Voyager does well, like timey-wimey, cool time travel stuff, big science fiction storyline stuff, all present in that hour.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Go to your next pick. What's your next pick?
Deep Space Nine. I'm gonna pick. It's Rocks and Shoals. It's a Deep Space Nine episode from the 6th season. It's kind of tucked right in the middle of like the extended war story at the beginning of season 6 and to season 5. It's the episode where Sisko and company are on a Jem'Hadar fighter that crashes on this big desert planet, and they're stuck with a bunch of Jem'Hadar soldiers. And there's tense negotiations between Sisko and company and the Jem'Hadar. There's hostages on both sides, and Dax is injured gravely, and yeah, there's a lot of pressure to resolve a really tense situation. And on the space station on Deep Space Nine, it's in the middle of the occupation of the station from the Dominion. So like Gul Dukat and Wei Yun are all involved. They're all running the show on the station. And there's this great storyline with Kira having to fight back against like the routine of waking up every day on a space station that's run by Gul Dukat and Dominion, and like having her coffee handed to her by a Cardassian officer and saying good morning Dukat, and having to push back against letting that become like, oh, it's just normal. Life, you know, it's like normal. Yeah, having to fight against that normalcy. I love that a lot. I love that storyline just as much as I love the stuff on the planet with Sisko and Nog and O'Brien and Bashir and Garrick. There's some really good guest stars. The guy who plays the main Jem'Hadar soldier and the guy who plays the Vorta. Like the Jem'Hadar remember they have Ketracel White. They're all addicted to a drug, and that's how they're controlled. Yeah. And they're running out of Ketracel White, so the Vorta is like trying to ration it, and once they run out, they're going to go crazy and kill each other and kill the
Yeah.
Vorta. So everybody's got pressure to figure something out to get out off this planet. And I just, it does all the stuff Deep Space Nine does really well. It's dark. It's got the wartime element. It's got some really cool location shooting. They're on this, like, they're in this vast like desert setting. Really cool location stuff that you don't get a lot of in 90s era Trek. And yeah, it's gritty. It's got that serialized element. Standalone enough, like it's got its own element for sure. It's very much its own episode, but it alludes to all these other big things that are happening. So to me, it would be like a little reminder of, you know, that serialized element of Deep Space Nine, the war story. But it functions on its own enough to be a standalone episode, and it's definitely one of my favorite Deep Space Nine episodes. But Deep Space Nine is always really hard to pick because it's got that element. Like it's kind of like Discovery, where it's very serialized, and some of their best episodes are very dependent on, you know, long-standing character development and things that happened in other episodes. So it's kind of hard sometimes to pick like the standalone episode, especially if you're trying to whittle it down to like an episode that features the cast and everybody's got something to do. And if you want all those things, it can be tough to find a DS9 episode that checks all the boxes.
Yeah,
that works as a standalone.
Yeah.
What about you?
Yeah, I think that's a great pick. It definitely has all the Deep Space Nine elements in it. I think it represents the show really well. I think it's a great pick. Yeah, it has everything that it's not just, you know, on the station. It's, you know, it's got, like you mentioned, great location shooting and elements for there. So great pick.
Cool.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. What's your Deep Space Nine?
My Deep Space Nine is kind of a cheat. I did Trials and Tribulations because it's a TOS along with a Deep Space Nine episode. And I think, again, my theme was, you know, it was not going to be on like an everyday, you know, episode. And I think that...
Yeah, you weren't looking for bottle episodes.
No, this is... you know, out of the time, it's in a different time. I don't know what else to say. It's just it's a great episode, and I couldn't not bring it with me because it's TOS and Deep Space Nine. So
that definitely crossed my mind for a while there. I was like, the idea of not doing a TOS episode, picking a Discovery episode, and picking Trials and Tribulations because it covers both.
Yeah.
And if you're talking rewatchability, like I mean, that's certainly one of the most rewatchable episodes of Star Trek. It's just like pure joy. It's really a fun time. So I toyed with it myself, and I'm really happy that you picked it because it's on the list. It's on somebody's list, and it got mentioned today. So definitely a good pick, and one that is pretty undeniable for a topic like this.
Yeah.
Yeah. TNG?
Yeah. What's your TNG pick? Or do you want me to go?
I'll go.
Okay. Cool.
I'll go, and my pick is The Measure of a Man. It's TNG's another one. It's really tough because it's like an embarrassment of riches. There's a lot of episodes I toyed with, but The Measure of a Man I think does represent TNG at its best. It's dialogue driven. It's character heavy.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's Picard giving speeches and being Picard.
Yeah.
and at his peak. It's got big stakes. It's life or death for Data. And it's smart, and it's very like wonky, I guess. Like it's just like a lot of legalese. It's courtroom drama, but there's a lot of emotion to it as well.
Right.
Like there's a big emotional punch at the end with the last scene in the briefing room between Riker and Data. Riker, of course, has to argue against Data. He's kind of put in that uncomfortable position, and that leads to some really cool drama. But it's another one that I think like the most. It doesn't use the entire cast. There's a lot of people that don't necessarily have a ton to do.
Yeah.
But a lot of our principles, like the main, you know, the I think characters that you would think of most at the very top of the list, you know, Picard, Riker, Data, even Geordi to some extent, have a lot to do in this episode and a lot of really good scenes. So I got to go with Measure of Man. I love that episode. I find it really, really rewatchable. The dialogue just flows. It feels like one of my favorite shows is The West Wing, and that's like very and very fast with talking, and it always reminds me of that. Like it's all dialogue, it's all talking, but it feels like an action show the way it's paced. So I'll go with Measure of Man.
Yeah, I think that's a great pick. That was definitely in the conversation for me as far as which TNG episode I was gonna bring. But yeah, it's a really understated episode. It's not really like a big nothing. I mean, something big happens, but it
Sure.
It's so understated, and it just opens up this huge can of worms, and then you realize what the stakes are here. But yeah, it's definitely a great pick.
I think it's it contrasts, like the difference between The Measure of a Man and Deadlock and Twilight is the difference between TNG and Voyager and Enterprise. Like that's the kinds of shows they are.
Yeah.
TNG is much more, dialogue driven, character drama, kind of thing. Where Voyager and Enterprise, and even Deep Space Nine, veer more heavily into action adventure, kinds of stories. A lot of the time. So I feel like it represents what TNG is to me, like the way I see what TNG is, I guess. So, but what about you?
I'm going big. I'm doing the best of both worlds. Part
Nothing wrong with
that. Might be my favorite Borg episode. It's I just love the story. I take the flagship captain and use that as a spearhead to take over the galaxy,
the universe, galaxy.
It's awesome. I think it's big enough that I feel like the rewatchability definitely holds up for me. It's just a great all around episode.
Yeah, I mean, if that's one that also comes into play when talking about like what's the single best thing Star Trek ever produced. The Best of Both Worlds is something that
it's up
merits that. Yeah, that's in that conversation for me, definitely. So definitely really hard to ignore that. That was on the list. That was 2, 3 on my short list of episodes to choose here.
Right.
But it's a good sheet. It's 2 episodes, 2-parter. You get a little extra there.
Yeah.
And it does. That's another one that I think actually does kind of use the cast really well. There's good moments kind of across the board. You get cool little Worf moments, particularly in part 2. I feel like some of those action scenes, like Worf and Data on the shuttle going to save Picard. He's involved in the story. So it makes good use of the cast. It's got big action adventure elements. It's the Borg. It feels like a movie. Like it's got all the. You did good. It's definitely a good pick.
What's your TOS pick?
This is the one I've been going back and forth on, and it's actually, you would think it would be between Wrath of Khan and City.
Yes.
But the one I'm actually going to pick, and I'm going to go with it because of this, like what best represents like
TOS.
When I think of TOS, what do I think of? And I'm going to go with Amok Time. To me, it's the trio. It's those 3 characters
right
on a planet, working through a problem. One of the crew is intrinsically like part of the problem. They're trying to save one of them. They're working to help one another, and it's got all of the iconic stuff that I think kind of represents TOS. It's got the silly fight scene with the big music and that it's got that element to it. But it's also got it's got real depth to it too. Like I think they're unbelievable scenes. Every time I go back to Amok Time, that's another one that to me is like in that conversation. Like, what's the best thing Star Trek's ever done? And you can make a case. I could make a case. I would have to kind of go back on my word over the last however many years that City on the Edge Forever is my favorite episode. But Amok Time is really close. Like every time I watch it, it just blows me away.
Yeah.
I think of the scene in Spock's quarters where Kirk's getting Spock to like open up and tell him like what is Pon farr, like what is going on,
what's going on.
The way he kind of draws the information out of Spock, and Spock opens up to Kirk is one of my favorite scenes. I always think of the scene in the turbo lift on the way to the bridge when they arrive at Vulcan, and Spock says, "I'm allowed to bring friends with to the ceremony." And of course, he asks Kirk to go, and then he turns to McCoy and says, "I would like McCoy to come too." And McCoy says, "I would be honored, sir." That's impactful. That's a big moment. And like I said, all the stuff on the planet. And I think the last scene in sickbay when Kirk, of course, is not dead, and Spock has this big emotional outburst. Is like one of the iconic great TOS moments. So it's got all the great iconic stuff, and I think it represents like what TOS is to me in a way that some other stuff maybe not quite as much. I know I just like the Wrath of Khan for sure. I could just as easily pick the Wrath of Khan. I could just as easily pick the City of the Edge of Forever. But I'm
do this tomorrow. We'll be
ask me
back at 7 a.m. No.
If you asked me at this time yesterday, or maybe a few hours from now yesterday, after I just watched the Wrath of Khan, there's no way I don't.
Right.
With it as fresh as like I literally just watched it, but with 24 hours to think about it and talk myself back into a mock time, I'll go with the mock.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I agree with you. A mock time is like the epitome of TOS. When you think of it, there's definitely a few episodes that come to mind. City, obviously, Wrath of Khan, and obviously this episode. So, yeah, it's a great pick as usual.
Appreciate it. What's yours?
My pick again. I'm going with not a bottle show. It's not on the ship. We're on a Klingon ship. We're in a different time. I'm picking Star Trek: The Voyage Home.
Wow!
I think it's
nice.
it's a great. It has the rewatchability, obviously, but it's so fun and so lighthearted, and I feel like there might be some doom and gloom on the desert island, and I think that this is just like a fun time travel adventure that is perfect in my mind. So
yeah,
yep.
Hard to argue with that. Star Trek 4 is, if you're looking for some levity and you want to balance out some of your picks that were maybe a little bit more doom and gloom, like you said. Wrath of Khan or the Voyage Home is certainly as good a pick as you can come up with.
Yep.
And it's another one if you're talking like you want to see the whole cast kind of in action. If this is the only element of that show you're going to have, Voyage Home does a great job of that. Everybody's got something to do. They're all involved. They're all key to solving the problem and getting out of there. With George and Gracie, it's great. It does it all. Like it's got a great like classic Star Trek message to it, and it's got great humor. It's got some great dramatic stuff. I think it covers the gamut, and it is representative of like TOS at its best.
Yep.
So definitely a good pick.
Yeah. Did you have any honorable mentions?
A lot of honorable mentions. If I could have worked, if I was going to kick one of the other shows out and Discovery in, I would have picked Context for Kings.
Right.
Context for Kings is rising in my esteem every time I go back to Discovery. I think it's such a great setup for the show that we ultimately get. The Battle of Binary Stars, Vulcan Hello is a really good pilot, and there's a lot of really cool stuff in that. But it kind of acts as like a prologue, where Context for Kings is like, okay, now we're into it. I think it really sets the tone for the show we're going to get, and I think it's really rewatchable. So that would probably be my Discovery pick, with if memory serves, kind of in the ballpark too. New Eden in the ballpark too.
Yeah.
And then for some of the other shows, TNG, Best of Both Worlds, certainly right there. Yesterday's Enterprise was very much right there.
Yeah.
Darmok was in the conversation a little bit for a few minutes. I toyed with that idea. DS9, when I think of like standalone episodes, I always kind of go to Duet, but Duet is it's kind of an anomaly a little bit. It's a tour. It's a duet. It's two actors,
yes,
with dialogue. And it's the non-visitor is Kira, and it's a guest star as the Cardassian. So if one of my qualifiers is, give me something that gives me a taste of the whole crew as much as possible and involves as many people as possible, it kind of always slightly pushes me away from Duet for something like that, as great as I think it is. I went away from In the Pale Moonlight and Far Beyond the Stars because they're very heavy, really dark picked. two Enterprise and DS9 Voyager and Enterprise episodes are also very dark,
Yeah.
with bad things happening.
Yeah.
So I wanted to find something maybe a little bit less doom and gloom.
Yeah.
For Voyager, I toyed with Blink of an Eye, I toyed with Scorpion, I toyed with Ear of Hell. But if I'm talking real rewatchability, I think I might, if I had to be an the episode I've watched the most in my life of Voyager, it's Deadlock. I don't know why, but it's the one I find myself going back to and just like getting a taster of the most.
Yeah.
And Enterprise, Similitude, Cogenitor.
Name all the good Enterprise.
Name all the good ones. Your Doctor, Shuttlepod 1, Observer Effect is always one that I'm gravitating to. And if I wanted to cheat, I'd pick the Vulcan arc. Yeah. But I tried actually to pick. I when I saw so many people doing that and picking 2-parters, which is awesome, 3-parters, I said to myself, I'm gonna pick like one-offs. I'm gonna pick one episode. I'm gonna try to keep it to one thing, just to be different. So that pushed me away from the Vulcan arc.
Yep.
But yeah. What about you? What are your honorable mentions?
Star Trek 09.
What were your hardest cuts?
That was a hard cut, just because I definitely have like baggage with that, obviously. But I think again it had good rewatchability. I think we get a lot of exposure to the crew and this new universe or timeline that's been created. So yeah, that was a hard cut for me. Another hard cut, this will be my last episode, was Resolutions from Voyager.
Oh yeah,
because literally it's a desert island. They're stuck on a desert island pretty much, and you're stuck on a desert island, and you just feel for it. And then again, it's this cheesy romantic episode about, but it also has some great I don't know, crew moments where they kind of realize what the captain and Chakotay means to them, and they turn around. And so definitely. Yeah. One last question I'll ask you about it. If you had a desert, we're doing desert island picks. If you had one series or show, what would you bring? I know that's a really tough question.
It's tough. It's really tough.
If you're just,
if I had to go with one, and it's for the rest of my life, I guess. Part of me says I should probably cut Enterprise and TOS just because they're lesser, like there's less of it. Where I'd go with one of the shows that has the 7 seasons, 170 some episodes.
Yeah.
I guess TNG, but TNG can be frustrating in that it's got kind of a lesser first season.
Yeah.
A little less consistent season 2 than what it becomes, and then I think sometimes struggling 7th season 2.
Yeah.
But that middle portion, 3, 4, 5, 6, I love so much.
Yeah.
Do I want those 4 seasons and then some bonuses 1, 2, 7,
right?
Or do I want like a little more consistency with Deep Space Nine? I'll go with TNG, but ask me tomorrow, and I might say DS9.
Yeah.
What about you?
Oh man,
Voyager.
It's Voyager. Ask me tomorrow. Maybe it'll change. I'm not sure. It's Voyager. I think that again, we talked about baggage with 09. I have baggage with Voyager, and I think that's what I'm bringing.
Yeah, nothing wrong with that. If I had Star Trek Voyager on me on a desert island with, I'd be fine.
Yep.
I'd be happy as a clam. I could deal with that.
Yeah.
Any of these shows would make that experience a lot less. Yeah, there's no wrong answer.
Even if you were to just bring one episode, I would still be happy as a clam. So,
yeah, absolutely. Yep. So,
yep. Yeah. So that's been our desert island picks.
Yeah, it was fun. It was a different way to think of, like, it's a different lens to think of, like, okay, you can always do like what's your favorite episode. Right. It's just a little bit of a different hat to put on when you're thinking of, which episodes to pick, I guess.
Yeah.
And it led me to some different answers. Like when I did this sort of thing with Jim on Trek Ranks a couple of years ago now for the 1 episode marathon or the 5 episode marathon for a newcomer, I picked totally different episodes. Like I don't think I had any repeats than I went with here. So, and I think if I just picked straight away like my favorite episode from each show, I'd have 5 different picks. So yeah.
Yeah. Any Star Trek content that you'd like to mention?
There was an interview. This is actually a lot different than what we usually say. Usually we focus a lot on podcasts and sometimes like other YouTube videos. But there's an interview on Trek Core. It's probably about a week and a half old by now. But I really, really enjoyed it. It was with his name's David Barrett. He was a director on. He directed Magic to Make the Saints Band Go Mad, and he directed Saints of Imperfection in season 2 for Discovery, and he also directed an episode of Enterprise.
Yeah,
and I love hearing from those people, like not people who are like staples on the show, Alex Kurtzman, Rick Berman kind of people who talk a lot and are staples there all the time. Not, the production designer, people who are involved with every episode. But I like hearing from like the hired hand who comes in and does an episode, and hearing from somebody who's doing Discovery now, but had a little taste of Enterprise, like in the last regime of Star Trek. It was an interesting, different kind of flavor for an interview with somebody who's involved in Star Trek. So I would point everybody over there that should read that interview. If you're interested at all in like the production of Star Trek, like how's the show produced and what's it like on the set, doing the grind every day. I think that's a nice taste of that. So what about you?
No podcast, but I will mention some Discovery content. I know we've been covering Discovery a lot, but this one I feel like it's a big thing to watch because we are so high on Discovery. So there's a YouTube channel, EC Henry. I definitely recommend go checking it out.
He's really good.
Yeah, they had they produced a video that's titled Discovery's Biggest Flaws. And all that is kind of explained in the video. Just watch it. Let us know what you think. I think it would be fun to kind of maybe talk about that on the show sometime. So
I agree. Yeah, I watched it and I enjoyed it, and I didn't agree 100% of everything. Like I would have little nuances that I'd want to talk about, but I hear what he's saying, and he's not wrong about a lot of what he has to say. So I would definitely echo that. Everybody should go check that out and see what they have to say, because this is a guy who's very fair-minded. He's not a Discovery hater by any means. Like, he's not somebody who's been consistently poking holes in the show since day one. Like, he enjoys the show. There are other videos on his channel that express that. His positive reviews of season 1 and I believe earlier in season 2. So this is not somebody who's just out to attack the show. He's very much a positive fan of Star Trek as a whole, and has been positive about Discovery as well. So good constructive criticism from a fan.
Make some fair points.
Yes, very much so.
Yeah, so that's been the episode this week. We will be back next week. Talk about more Star Trek content and get a good conversation going.
Yep, looking forward to it.